Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Zodiac Sleep Channel. Tonight's story belongs to Gemini, to the one whose mind never stops, the one who is curious about everything and committed to almost nothing, not because they don't care, but because caring about one thing means closing the door on 100 others. And Gemini has never been able to close a door without wondering what was on the other side of it. To the one who knows a little about everyone and everything, who can talk to anyone in any room, who is never bored and never quite satisfied, who has 1,000 connections and sometimes wonders, late at night, why none of them feel like home. To the one who has been told they are scattered, restless, unable to focus, as if curiosity were a flaw, as if the desire to taste everything life offered was something to apologize for. Tonight's story is about Dylan. He is 23 years old and he lives in Miami, and by every external measure, he has everything a person could want. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, he is going to be alone with himself, and he is going to find out that this is exactly what he has been avoiding and exactly what he needs. Get comfortable. Take a slow breath. Let the ocean do the rest. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The party was on the 40th floor, and Dylan left it at 1 in the morning, which surprised everyone because Dylan never left early. Leaving early was not something he did. He was usually the last person at any gathering, the one who knew the staff by name, the one who could keep a conversation going long after everyone else had run out of things to say, the one who treated the end of a party like a small personal failure that he was constitutionally required to prevent. But tonight, he had stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of a penthouse that belonged to someone he had met 2 weeks ago, holding a drink he didn't want, surrounded by 40 people who all knew his name, and he had felt something that he did not have a word for and did not like. It was not boredom. He was rarely bored. It was something underneath boredom, something quieter and more permanent. The feeling of being in exactly the kind of room he had spent years learning how to be the best in, and realizing that being the best in it did not feel like anything at all. So he had left. He had said his goodbyes, which took 20 minutes, because he had to say goodbye to everyone, because that was who he was. The person who could not leave a room without acknowledging every single person in it, a trait that people read as charm and that he was beginning to suspect was something closer to a fear of being forgotten. And then he had taken the elevator down 40 floors and walked out into the Miami night. The air hit him the way Miami air always did, warm and thick and salt-heavy, even this far from the water. The particular humidity of a city built on the edge of the ocean in the subtropics. A city that never quite cooled down, that held a day's heat in its concrete and released it slowly all night long. He had grown up in this air. He knew it the way you knew the thing you had never lived without. He was a Gemini. He had read about his sign the way he read about everything, which was to say, widely and shallowly, collecting facts the way other people collected stamps, accumulating an enormous quantity of information that he could deploy in conversation, and that rarely settled into anything like wisdom. The descriptions of Gemini always emphasized the duality, the two faces, the twins, the idea that there were somehow two people inside one body, pulling in different directions. He had always found this both accurate and incomplete. It was not that there were two of him, It was that there were too many of him, that he contained more selves than he knew what to do with, that on any given night he could be the life of the party or the quiet observer or the deep conversationalist or the careless flirt, and that all of them were real and that none of them felt like the actual him, because he was not sure there was an actual him underneath all the versions. This was the thought he had been avoiding for several years. Tonight, walking through the Miami night, he had stopped being able to avoid it. Chapter 2. He didn't go home. Home was a condo his father had bought for him in a building with a doorman and a gym he never used and a view of the bay that he had stopped noticing within a month of moving in. Instead, he walked, which was unusual for him because in Miami nobody walked. The city was built for cars and the distances were long, and the heat made walking an act of either necessity or rebellion. Tonight, it felt like rebellion, or maybe just like the only thing his body wanted to do, which was to move without a destination, to be in motion without the motion meaning anything. Miami at night was a city of surfaces, and Dylan had always loved this about it, the way it didn't pretend to be deep, the way it offered you beauty and pleasure and sensation without asking you to find meaning in any of it. The Art Deco hotels along the beach glowed in their pastel neon pink and teal and electric blue, colors that existed nowhere in nature, colors that had been chosen by designers in the 1930s to make people feel like they had arrived somewhere glamorous and unreal. The palm trees stood in their perfect rows, lit from below by uplights that made them look like stage props, which in a sense they were, because the entire city was a kind of stage, a place where people came to perform versions of themselves more exciting than the versions they lived the rest of the year. Dylan had been performing a version of himself for so long that he had lost track of when the performance had started. He was good at it. This was the thing about being a Gemini that the horoscopes got right without quite understanding the cost of it. He was adaptable. He could be whoever the room needed him to be. He could read a person within 30 seconds of meeting them and adjust himself to become the most charming possible companion, mirroring their energy, matching their references, laughing at the right moments, asking the questions that made people feel interesting. People left conversations with Dylan feeling good about themselves, and they remembered him fondly, and almost none of them knew anything real about him, because he had become so skilled at the performance of intimacy that he rarely had to risk the real thing. The real thing was risky. The real thing meant choosing one version of yourself and standing behind it, which meant the other versions died, or at least went quiet. And Dylan had spent his whole life keeping all his versions alive because he could not bear the loss of any of them. This was, he understood now, walking past the glowing hotels, a kind of cowardice that he had successfully disguised as openness for 23 years. He passed a group of people his age spilling out of a club, laughing, beautiful, lit up with the particular energy of people who were exactly where they wanted to be. A year ago, he would have known half of them. 6 months ago, he would have joined them. Tonight, he kept walking toward the water, which was the one thing in Miami that did not perform, the one surface that went all the way down. Chapter 3. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he knew without looking that it would be one of three people, and he was right, because he always checked. It was Sophia. Before Sophia this week, there had been Camilla, and before Camilla, there had been a girl whose name he was slightly ashamed to realize he had to think about for a second. And the chain went back like that, week after week, a long line of beautiful, interesting women who had each, briefly, seemed like they might be the thing he was looking for, and who had each, within a few weeks, revealed themselves to be exactly what they were, which was another person, a whole person, with needs and depths, and the reasonable expectation that he would meet them somewhere real. He never met them somewhere real. This was the pattern, and he was aware of the pattern because he was aware of most things about himself in the abstract way that never quite translated into change. He would meet someone, and the meeting would be electric, because he was good at electric, because the first few weeks of knowing someone were all surface and possibility and the particular thrill of a new person to discover. And discovery was the thing Dylan loved most in the world. And then the discovery phase would end, as it always did, because you could only discover a person for so long before you actually knew them. And knowing them meant the possibility had collapsed into a single actuality. And the single actuality, however wonderful, was always less interesting to him than the infinite possibility that had preceded it. He had thought for a while that this meant he simply hadn't met the right person. This was the story he told himself and occasionally told others, the romantic version, the one where he was a seeker who simply had very high standards and would know the right one when she came along. He no longer believed this story. He had met right people. Sophia was, by any reasonable measure, a right person, smart and funny and genuinely kind, the kind of person who asked you questions and actually listened to the answers. The problem was not Sophia. The problem was that the moment any person became real to him, became known, became a single definite thing, rather than a glittering field of possibility, something in him began, quietly and against his will, to look for the exit. He put the phone back in his pocket without answering. This, too, was new. Normally, he would have answered, because answering was easy, because keeping the connection alive cost him nothing and gave him the small constant reassurance of being wanted by many people at once, which was the closest thing he had to a feeling of being loved. Many shallow connections he had discovered long ago could approximate the feeling of one deep one, the way a great number of small lights could approximate the brightness of a single sun, except that they couldn't, not really, and the difference was something he felt most acutely on nights like this one, walking alone, with a phone full of people who would come if he called, and not one of whom knew him at all. The ocean was close now. He could hear it under the city sounds, the low, constant sound of the Atlantic doing what it had done for millions of years, indifferent to Miami, indifferent to Dylan, indifferent to the entire glittering performance of the city that had been built on its edge. He found this indifference comforting in a way he could not explain. Chapter 4. He took off his shoes when he reached the sand, holding them in one hand, and walked toward the water. The beach at night was empty in a way it never was during the day, The tourists gone back to their hotels, the families gone home, the whole vast stretch of sand belonging for these few hours to the people who came here precisely because everyone else had left. He was one of those people tonight, though he had not known he was until he arrived. The sand was still warm from the day, holding the heat the way the city held it, and beneath the warm surface it was cooler, and he dug his feet in slightly as he walked, feeling both temperatures at once, the day and the night layered together in the same handful of ground. He had not felt the ground beneath his feet in a long time. He realized this with the small shock of someone noticing an absence they had not known was there. When had he last walked barefoot on anything? When had he last touched the actual physical world rather than moving through it in cars and elevators and air-conditioned rooms? The climate-controlled life of a person who had never had to be uncomfortable and had therefore never had to be fully present anywhere. The water reached his feet, warm at the surface, the Atlantic in summer, and he stood at the edge of it and looked out at the darkness where the ocean met the sky, and you could not tell where one ended and the other began. There were lights far out on the water, ships or oil platforms or something, he didn't know, and the lights of planes coming and going from the airport, and above all of it, the stars, faint through the city's glow but present, the same stars that had been there before Miami and would be there after it. He was a Gemini, an air sign, and he had always felt this in himself, the airiness, the way his thoughts moved like wind, quick and changeable and impossible to hold. His mind had not stopped once tonight. His mind never stopped. It was, he sometimes thought, the central fact of his existence, more central than the wealth or the freedom or the endless options. The simple, relentless fact that his mind generated thoughts faster than he could ever act on them, that for everything he did, there were 100 things he thought about doing, that he lived in a permanent state of mental abundance that looked from the outside like having everything and felt from the inside like never being able to rest. The ocean did not have this problem. The ocean did one thing over and over, forever, and the one thing was enough, was in fact everything. He envied it. He stood at the edge of the warm water in the dark, and he envied the ocean its single purpose, its inability to be anything other than what it was. And he wondered, for the first time in his life with real seriousness, what it would feel like to be one thing. Not many things, not all the things. One thing, chosen, committed to, stood behind. He did not know. He had never tried it. The thought frightened him, and also, underneath the fear, drew him, the way the deep water drew him, even though he knew better than to swim alone at night. Chapter 5. There was a surfboard half buried in the sand further down the beach, abandoned or forgotten, and Dylan walked to it and sat down beside it, and the sight of it unlocked a memory he had not visited in a long time. He had learned to surf when he was 15. It had been, for one strange and uncharacteristic summer, the only thing he cared about. He had gotten up at 5 in the morning, which he never did, and driven to the beach before school, and spent hours in the water trying to do something that he was at first terrible at, falling over and over, swallowing seawater, getting nowhere. This was the strange part, the part that did not fit the rest of his life. Dylan did not do things he was bad at. The whole architecture of his existence was designed to keep him in the territory of things that came easily, conversation and charm and the social games he had mastered before he was 10. Difficulty bored him or frightened him. He had never been sure which, and the moment something required sustained effort that did not produce immediate results, he tended to drift away from it toward something easier, the next shiny thing, the next easy win. He had quit piano and tennis and 3 different sports and 2 languages and an attempt at learning to code, all for the same reason, which was that the gap between where he was and where he wanted to be was a gap that could only be closed by doing the same boring, difficult thing over and over, and he had never been able to tolerate the boredom of that. But surfing, that one summer, he had tolerated. He had fallen 1,000 times and gotten back on the board 1,000 times, and he still did not fully understand why, except that there had been something about the ocean that made the repetition feel different, less like grinding and more like a conversation, the waves asking a question over and over, and him slowly, clumsily learning to answer. And then one morning in late July, he had stood up on the board and ridden a wave all the way to the shore, the whole thing maybe 10 seconds long, and in those 10 seconds, he had felt something he had never felt before, and had spent the years since trying to find again in 100 easier places, and had never quite found presence. That was the word he had now at 23 that he had not had at 15. For those 10 seconds, his mind had not generated a single thought. There had been no second self, no observer, no commentary, no list of other things he could be doing. There had only been the wave and the board and his body and the present moment, and his Gemini mind, for once in its restless life, had been completely, perfectly still, because the wave did not allow for divided attention, because you could not surf a wave while thinking about something else, because the ocean demanded the one thing Dylan found hardest to give, which was all of himself in one place at one time. He had stopped surfing in August when school started. He had never gone back. He looked at the abandoned board in the sand and felt the loss of something he had not let himself feel for years, the loss of the one activity that had ever made him whole, abandoned like everything else the moment it stopped being easy. Chapter 6. He lay back on the sand and looked up at the sky, and he let himself think about the thing he had been not thinking about for years, which was the question of what he was going to do with his life. It was a ridiculous question for someone in his position, and he knew it, and the ridiculousness of it was part of why he had avoided it for so long. He did not need to do anything. His father had made enough money that Dylan would never need to work, and his father, who had built his fortune through a focus so total that he had been largely absent from Dylan's childhood, had communicated in 100 small ways that he expected Dylan to do something impressive with the freedom he had been given, and Dylan had responded to this expectation by doing nothing at all, which he understood was a kind of rebellion, and also a kind of paralysis, and also possibly a kind of revenge. The problem was not a lack of options. The problem was the opposite. Dylan could do anything. He had the money to start any business, fund any project, move to any city, learn any skill. The world was, for him, an open field of infinite possibility. And this was supposed to be the dream This was the thing that everyone said they wanted: freedom, total freedom, the absence of any constraint. But Dylan had discovered the secret that the people who wanted this freedom did not know, which was that total freedom was its own kind of prison. When you could do anything, every choice you made was a choice against everything else you could have done. And for a Gemini, for whom the road not taken was always at least as compelling as the road taken, every choice felt like a loss. Every commitment felt like an amputation, and so he made no choices at all and remained perfectly, miserably free. His friends who had to work, he had slowly come to understand, were in some ways luckier than him. They did not have infinite options. The constraints of needing a paycheck had narrowed their lives down to something manageable, something with edges, something they could actually live inside rather than drowning in the open ocean of total possibility. He had envied their constraint without understanding why, the way he had envied the ocean, its single purpose. He was beginning to understand it now. A life with no edges was not a life. It was a permanent hovering, a refusal to land, a 23-year extension of the moment before you commit, stretched out so long that it had started to feel like the whole of his existence. He thought about the surfboard. He thought about the 10 seconds. He thought about the strange truth that the happiest he had ever been was during the one period of his life when he had voluntarily chosen to be bad at something difficult and to keep doing it anyway, and that everything since then had been an increasingly sophisticated effort to never be in that vulnerable position again, to stay in the realm of the easy and the impressive and the surface, and that the cost of staying there had been the thing he was feeling right now on his back in the sand, the deep, quiet emptiness that had driven him out of the party and down to the water and into this confrontation with himself that he had been postponing for as long as he could remember. The stars were turning slowly overhead. Somewhere behind him, the city continued its performance, the music and the lights and the 1,000 parties full of people performing versions of themselves. He was not in any of them tonight. For the first time in years, he was exactly one place, doing exactly one thing, which was lying on the sand and being honest with himself, and it was difficult, and it was uncomfortable, and it was, he realized slowly, the most real he had felt since he was 15 years old on a surfboard at dawn. Chapter 6. He lay back on the sand and looked up at the sky, and he let himself think about the thing he had been not thinking about for years, which was the question of what he was going to do with his life. It was a ridiculous question for someone in his position, and he knew it. And the ridiculousness of it was part of why he had avoided it for so long. He did not need to do anything. His father had made enough money that Dylan would never need to work, and his father, who had built his fortune through a focus so total that he had been largely absent from Dylan's childhood, had communicated in 100 small ways that he expected Dylan to do something impressive with the freedom he had been given, and Dylan had responded to this expectation by doing nothing at all, which he understood was a kind of rebellion and also a kind of paralysis, and also possibly a kind of revenge. The problem was not a lack of options. The problem was the opposite. Dylan could do anything. He had the money to start any business, fund any project, move to any city, learn any skill. The world was, for him, an open field of infinite possibility. And this was supposed to be the dream. This was the thing that everyone said they wanted. Freedom, total freedom, the absence of any constraint. But Dylan had discovered the secret that the people who wanted this freedom did not know, which was that total freedom was its own kind of prison. When you could do anything, every choice you made was a choice against everything else you could have done. And for a Gemini, for whom the road not taken was always at least as compelling as the road taken, every choice felt like a loss. Every commitment felt like an amputation. And so he made no choices at all and remained perfectly, miserably free. His friends who had to work, he had slowly come to understand, were in some ways luckier than him. They did not have infinite options. The constraints of needing a paycheck had narrowed their lives down to something manageable, something with edges, something they could actually live inside rather than drowning in the open ocean of total possibility. He had envied their constraint without understanding why. The way he had envied the ocean its single purpose, he was beginning to understand it now. A life with no edges was not a life. It was a permanent hovering, a refusal to land, a 23-year extension of the moment before you commit, stretched out so long that it had started to feel like the whole of his existence. He thought about the surfboard. He thought about the 10 seconds. He thought about the strange truth that the happiest he had ever been was during the one period of his life when he had voluntarily chosen to be bad at something difficult and to keep doing it anyway, and that everything since then had been an increasingly sophisticated effort to never be in that vulnerable position again, to stay in the realm of the easy and the impressive and the surface, and that the cost of staying there had been the thing he was feeling right now on his back in the sand, the deep, quiet emptiness that had driven him out of the party and down to the water and into this confrontation with himself that he had been postponing for as long as he could remember. The stars were turning slowly overhead. Somewhere behind him, the city continued its performance, the music and the lights and the 1,000 parties full of people performing versions of themselves. He was not in any of them tonight. For the first time in years, he was exactly one place, doing exactly one thing, which was lying on the sand and being honest with himself. And it was difficult, and it was uncomfortable, and it was, he realized slowly, the most real he had felt since he was 15 years old on a surfboard at dawn. Chapter 7. He was not going to fix his entire life tonight. He knew that. He was a Gemini, and Geminis did not have epiphanies that lasted. They had 1,000 small revelations that flared brightly and faded by morning, replaced by the next interesting thought. And he had learned not to trust the feeling of having figured everything out, because he had had that feeling many times, and it had never once survived contact with an actual Tuesday. But this felt slightly different, lying on the sand with the ocean breathing beside him. Not because the thought was more profound, but because for once he was not rushing past it toward the next thing. He was staying with it. He was letting it be uncomfortable. And the staying, he understood, was the entire point, was the muscle he had never developed, was the one thing that might actually change something if he could learn to do it more than once. He thought about what he might do, not the grand version, not the impressive thing that would satisfy his father, but something smaller and truer. He thought he might start surfing again, not as a career, not as an identity, not as the new thing he would throw himself into completely and abandon in a month, but as a practice, a return to the one place where his mind had ever gone quiet, a deliberate choice to be bad at something difficult and to keep doing it anyway every morning before the city woke up and the performance began. He thought he might keep his phone in his pocket more. He thought he might answer Sophia honestly tomorrow, might tell her the truth, which was that she deserved someone who could actually be there, and that he was not sure he was that person yet, but that he would like to find out, which was more honest than anything he had said to anyone in years. These were small things. He was aware they were small, but he was beginning to understand that the smallness was not a problem, that his whole life he had been chasing the large thing, the dramatic transformation, the single grand gesture that would resolve everything at once, precisely because the large thing was a fantasy, and the fantasy let him off the hook from the small things, which were the only things that were real. You did not become a different person in one night on a beach. You became a different person through 10,000 small choices, each one boring, each one easy to skip, each one a tiny vote for the kind of person you were trying to become. And the reason Dylan had never become anyone in particular was that he had never been willing to cast the same small vote twice in a row. The ocean kept breathing. The stars kept turning. He felt the warm sand under his back and the cooler sand beneath that. And he felt his own breath slowing, finally, the relentless engine of his mind finally idling, not because he had solved anything, but because he had stopped running from the thing he needed to feel. There was a particular peace in this that he had never accessed through any of the easier routes, the parties and the girls and the endless novelty, a peace that came not from stimulation, but from its absence, from being one person in one place, willing to feel one true thing all the way through. He was a Gemini. He would always be curious, always be drawn to the next thing, always contain more selves than he knew what to do with. That was not going to change, and he did not want it to change, because it was also the source of everything good in him, the curiosity and the quickness and the genuine delight he took in people and ideas and the endless variety of the world. But he was beginning to understand that curiosity and commitment were not opposites, that you could be fascinated by everything and still choose to go deep on one thing, that the two faces of the twins did not have to be at war, that a person could be many things and still, when it mattered, be wholly present for the one thing in front of them. Chapter 8. The night had cooled, the way Miami nights eventually did, the heat finally releasing its grip in the hours before dawn, and Dylan felt the change on his skin and did not mind it. He was still lying in the sand. He had been there for over an hour, which was, for him, an extraordinary length of time to spend doing nothing, to spend in a single place with a single set of thoughts. And the strangeness of it had worn off and become something almost comfortable, the way a cold pool became comfortable once you stopped fighting it. He thought about the people at the party, who were probably still there, still performing, still afraid of the moment the music stopped. And he did not feel superior to them, because he had been them for years and would probably be them again. But he felt, for tonight, a small distance from them, the distance of someone who had stepped outside the performance long enough to see it for what it was. He thought about Sophia and felt a tenderness toward her that was new, not the electric thrill of the chase, but something quieter, the beginning of an actual regard for her as a person rather than as a possibility. He thought about his father and felt, for the first time in a long time, something other than the familiar tangle of resentment and guilt, a small flicker of understanding, the recognition that his father's total focus, however much it had cost them both, had at least been a focus, had at least been a choice, had at least been the thing Dylan had never managed to do. The ocean was quieter now, the tide going out, the waves smaller and gentler against the sand, and the sound of it was the last sound in the world, the city behind him gone silent or far enough away that he could no longer hear it, just the water, doing its one thing over and over, the way it always had. He let the sound move through him. He let his thoughts slow until they came one at a time instead of all at once, and then with longer and longer gaps between them, and then finally with the gaps growing wide enough to rest in. He was a Gemini. His mind would start again in the morning, fast and bright and full of 1,000 directions, and he would have to make the small choice again and again the day after that, the choice to stay, to go deep, to be present for one true thing at a time. He knew this. He was not naive about how hard it would be. But tonight, for the length of one night on one beach, he had done it. He had stayed. He had felt the thing he had been running from and discovered that it did not destroy him, that underneath the restlessness and the performance and the endless novelty, there was a person, one person, quiet and real, who had been waiting this whole time for Dylan to stop moving long enough to find him. The stars turned slowly overhead. The warm sand held him. The ocean breathed its single patient breath in and out, asking nothing of him, offering everything. And Dylan, for the first time and longer than he could remember, stopped looking for the next thing and let himself be exactly where he was. He slept on the beach as the tide went out and the sky began very faintly, far out over the water, to think about morning. He slept the way the wave he had ridden at 15 had felt, all of him in one place, moving in one direction, completely present, completely himself. Not many things, one thing, for one night, whole. Somewhere in Miami, on a quiet beach, as the tide goes out and the city finally falls silent, a young man is sleeping on the warm sand. The party is over. The phone is in his pocket. The endless options can wait until morning. And Dylan sleeps, not running, not searching, not performing, just here, just one thing, just himself, all the way through. The ocean keeps breathing. Good night, Gemini.